Commander Sarah Chan watched the rain streak down her office window as she read the termination notice for the third time. 11 years of service. 11 years of perfect performance reviews, successful missions, and loyal dedication to the Terran Defense Fleet. All reduced to corporate speak about restructuring and budget optimization. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were letting her go on the same day news reports showed increased pirate activity in the outer colonies. But Admiral Morrison had made his decision clear during their brief meeting that morning. Nothing personal, Chen. You're a good officer, but we need to trim the fat. The board thinks we have too many middle management positions. Your crew can be redistributed. Sarah had served under Morrison when he was just a captain. She'd saved his ship during the Centauri conflict, pulling off a tactical maneuver that military academies now taught as standard procedure. But none of that seemed to matter when quarterly reports were due. She packed her personal items slowly, each object carrying memories of battles won and lives saved. The small model of her first command, the destroyer Vigilant. A photo of her graduating class from the academy. A commendation from the colonial governor of New Geneva for evacuating civilians during the plasma storms. Lieutenant Torres knocked on her doorframe. "Ma'am?" The crew wanted to say goodbye. Sarah looked up to see her bridge team crowded in the corridor. Chief Engineer Rodriguez held a bottle of real Earth whiskey. Navigator Kim had tears in her eyes. Even the usually stoic Weapons Officer Jackson looked uncomfortable. "We heard about the dismissal," Torres said quietly. "This is wrong, Commander. Everyone knows it." "Orders are orders, Lieutenant. You all know that better than anyone." Sarah managed to smile. "Besides, you'll do fine without me. You're good officers, all of you." "Where will you go?" Kim asked. Sarah shrugged. "I've got some savings. Maybe I'll try civilian shipping. There's always work in the freight corridors." The goodbye was harder than she expected. These people had followed her through 3 tours of duty. They trusted her judgment in situations where a wrong decision meant death. Now she was walking away, leaving them to serve under someone new who didn't know their strengths and weaknesses. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself in a dingy spaceport bar on Kepler Station, nursing a synthetic beer and reading job listings on her tablet. Most of the positions were for cargo haulers or passenger liners running milk runs between safe systems. Nothing that would use her tactical training or leadership experience. "You're Sarah Chan." She looked up to see a woman in civilian clothes, probably mid-40s with the kind of controlled posture that screamed military background despite the casual outfit. "Used to be Commander Chen. Now I'm just looking for work like everyone else here." Sarah gestured to the other unemployed spacers scattered around the bar. The woman sat down without invitation. "I'm Captain Martinez. I run security for Titan Mining Consortium. We've got a problem that might interest you. I'm not really in the mercenary business. This isn't about fighting, though that might come up. We've got mining operations in the Vega system. Good profits, strategic materials the fleet needs. But we're losing ships." Sarah leaned back. "Pirates? That's what we thought at first. But the attacks are too coordinated, too professional. These aren't raiders looking for easy cargo. They're targeting specific shipments, hitting our most valuable loads. Someone's feeding them intelligence. Sounds like a job for the defense fleet." Martinez laughed bitterly. "We've filed 17 requests for patrol support. The fleet says they don't have resources to spare for corporate security issues. Apparently, protecting the mining operations that supply their own ships isn't a priority." Sarah thought about Admiral Morrison's budget cuts. Probably fewer patrol ships, longer routes, less coverage for anything that wasn't a direct threat to Earth or the core worlds. "What are you offering?" "Command of our security fleet. 3 frigates, 2 destroyers, and a converted cruiser. Nothing fancy, but they're well maintained. Full tactical authority, decent pay, and a chance to actually protect people instead of pushing papers." The offer was tempting, but Sarah had learned to be cautious. What's the catch? The catch is that if you take this job, you'll be going up against whoever's organizing these attacks. And, based on the precision of their operations, I don't think we're dealing with ordinary pirates. Sarah finished her beer and studied Martinez carefully. The woman had the look of someone who'd seen combat, probably former fleet herself. The kind of person who wouldn't make dramatic statements lightly. How long do I have to decide? We're losing a ship every 2 weeks. The board is talking about pulling out of the Vega system entirely if we can't solve this problem. That's 3 mining stations, about 8,000 jobs, and a significant chunk of the rare earth elements the fleet uses in their jump drives. So no pressure at all. Martinez smiled grimly. None whatsoever. Look, Chen, I know your reputation. The Centauri conflict, the evacuation at New Geneva, the anti-piracy campaign in the Tau Ceti corridor. You're exactly what we need. And, frankly, it sounds like the fleet's loss could be our gain. After Martinez left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. 11 years of faithful service, dismissed because of budget projections and corporate restructuring. Meanwhile, the very operations that supplied the fleet with critical materials were under attack, and the defense fleet claimed they couldn't spare resources to help. She thought about her former crew, probably stationed on some patrol route protecting core world shipping lanes while the outer colonies struggled with inadequate security. She thought about the miners and their families on those stations, living in constant fear of the next attack. The next morning, Sarah called Martinez and accepted the position. 3 days later, she was aboard the TMC Defiance, a converted Hermes-class cruiser that served as the flagship of Titan Mining's security fleet. The ship was older than her last command, but someone had taken good care of it. The weapons systems were upgraded, the engines ran smooth, and the crew seemed competent. Her new first officer was Commander Webb, a former fleet officer who'd left after a disagreement with his superiors over colonial policy. The rest of the senior staff had similar stories, good officers who'd been passed over for promotion, dismissed for budget reasons, or simply grown tired of bureaucratic interference with their duties. What's our current situation? Sarah asked as she settled into the captain's chair. 3 ships overdue, Webb reported. The freight hauler Prosperity missed its check-in yesterday. The escort frigate Guardian went silent 12 hours ago. And we've lost contact with mining station Beta. Sarah studied the tactical display showing the Vega system. Attack pattern? Random, as far as we can tell. Different shipping lanes, different cargo types. The only constant is that they hit our most valuable loads. Show me the attack data. For the next 2 hours, Sarah analyzed every detail of the previous attacks. Ship positions, cargo manifests, crew reports from the few survivors. Gradually, a pattern began to emerge. They're not random, she said finally. Look at the timing. Every attack happens when our security patrols are at maximum distance. Someone's tracking our patrol routes. Webb frowned. Inside information? Has to be. Either someone in our organization is feeding them data, or they've compromised our communications. Or both. Sarah nodded grimly. Set course for the last known position of the Guardian. And, Webb. From now on, we maintain radio silence except for emergency frequencies. If there's a leak, we're not going to make it easy for them. As the Defiance moved deeper into the asteroid belt where their ships had been disappearing, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: purpose. The defense fleet might have dismissed her as unnecessary overhead, but, out here, people were depending on her skills to keep them alive. She had no idea that her departure from the fleet had already been noticed in places that mattered, or that the crisis in the Vega system was about to become much larger than a simple corporate security problem. The wreckage of the TMC Guardian drifted silently among the asteroids, its hull torn open by precise weapon strikes. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiance, studying the debris field through the main view screen while her crew conducted their investigation. No survivors, Captain, reported Chief Medical Officer Hayes over the comm, but the attack pattern is interesting. They didn't just destroy the ship, they boarded it first. Sarah frowned. How do you know? Blast marks on the interior bulkheads. Someone fought their way through the ship room by room. The crew made a stand at the bridge, but they were overwhelmed. What were they after? Unknown. The cargo hold is empty, but that could mean anything. The Guardian was escorting a civilian freighter when they disappeared. Webb approached with a tablet displaying sensor data. Captain, we've found something else. Residual energy signatures from the weapons that destroyed the ship. Sarah took the tablet and studied the readings. Her expression grew grim as she recognized the pattern. These are military-grade plasma cannons. Fleet specification. Pirates don't usually have access to that kind of firepower. No, they don't. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Hayes, any indication of what killed the crew? Conventional weapons, mostly. Some energy burns, but nothing exotic. Professional soldiers, not raiders. The implications were troubling. Pirates might attack mining ships for quick profit, but they wouldn't waste time boarding escort vessels or use expensive military weapons against low-value targets. This felt like something else entirely. Captain, called out Communications Officer Park from her station. I'm picking up a distress signal. Very faint, but it's coming from deeper in the asteroid field. Can you clean it up? Working on it now. Park's fingers danced across her console. It's the Prosperity. The freighter that went missing yesterday. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Still broadcasting? Barely. The signal is weak and intermittent. Either their transmitter is damaged, or they're trying to avoid detection. Set course for their location. Silent running protocols. The Defiance moved carefully through the asteroid field, using the massive rocks as cover while they approached the source of the distress signal. Sarah had turned off all non-essential systems to minimize their sensor signature. If whoever had attacked the Guardian was still in the area, she didn't want to announce their arrival. Contact, whispered Navigator Silva. I've got the Prosperity on visual. She's hiding in the shadow of a large asteroid, but I can see damage to her engines. The freight hauler Prosperity was a typical civilian vessel, built for cargo capacity rather than speed or defensive capability. Scorch marks along her hull showed where weapons fire had disabled her engines, but the ship appeared to be intact. Are they responding to hails? Sarah asked. Park shook her head. Radio silence. But I'm detecting life signs aboard. Could be a trap, Webb warned. Disable a freighter, use it as bait to draw in rescue ships. Sarah considered the possibility. It was exactly the kind of tactic she might use against an enemy. But the alternative was leaving potential survivors to die. Take us closer, but keep our weapons ready. If this is a trap, I want to be able to fight our way out. As they approached the Prosperity, Sarah could see the damage more clearly. The attackers had been surgical in their targeting, engines disabled, communications array destroyed, but the hull remained intact. Someone had wanted the ship captured, not destroyed. Captain, Park said urgently, I'm picking up another signal. Much stronger, military encryption. Fleet? No ma'am. Unknown origin, but the signal strength suggests a large ship, possibly multiple vessels. Sarah's blood ran cold. How close? Based on the signal strength, maybe 20 minutes out. She had to make a decision quickly. Board the Prosperity and risk being caught by whatever ships were approaching, or abandon potential survivors to save her own crew. Launch a shuttle, she decided. Skeleton crew, fast extraction. We get whoever's alive off that ship and get out of here. The shuttle bay doors opened silently in the vacuum, and Lieutenant Torres led a 4-person rescue team across the short distance to the damaged freighter. Sarah watched through the shuttle's camera feed as her people cut through the Prosperity's airlock. We're inside, Torres reported. Atmosphere is stable, but the ship is running on emergency power. Any crew? Working our way to the bridge now. Sarah drummed her fingers on the arm of her command chair, watching the chronometer. 15 minutes until those unknown ships arrived. She was starting to think this had been a mistake when Torres's voice crackled over the comm. Captain, you need to hear this. We found the crew barricaded on the bridge. They've got some interesting information about their attackers. The voice that came through the comb next was rough with exhaustion and stress. This is Captain Morrison of the freighter Prosperity. Are you TMC? This is Captain Chen of the security vessel Defiance. What happened to your ship? We were jumped by a fleet of modified warships. Military discipline, professional boarding actions. But that's not the strange part. Go on. They weren't after our cargo. They kept asking about TMC security protocols, patrol schedules, command structure. Specifically, they wanted to know about you. Sarah felt ice in her veins. About me? By name, Captain. They knew you'd taken command of TMC security. They wanted to know your location, your ship specifications, your crew roster. Webb looked at Sarah with alarm. This isn't a pirate operation. No, it's not. Sarah keyed her calm. Torres, get those people on the shuttle now. We're leaving. Copy that, Captain. 2 minutes. Sarah turned to Silva. As soon as that shuttle is aboard, I want maximum burn toward the edge of the system. If someone's specifically targeting us, we need to contact, called out Tactical Officer Reynolds. Multiple ships emerging from the asteroid field. They've been waiting for us. The main screen showed 6 vessels emerging from concealment among the larger asteroids. They were modified commercial ships, but their weapon signatures were definitely military grade. More troubling, they moved with the kind of coordination that spoke of professional naval training. They've got us boxed in, Webb observed. Frigate-class weapons on ships with cruiser-class shields. Someone spent serious money on this operation. The lead enemy ship opened a communication channel. The voice that emerged was cultured, educated, with the kind of confidence that came from command authority. Captain Chen. I am Admiral Voss. We've been looking forward to meeting you. Sarah had never heard the name, but the man's tone suggested he knew her well. You seem to have me at a disadvantage, Admiral. I don't believe we've been introduced. Oh, but we have. Indirectly. You see, I used to serve in the Terran Defense Fleet myself. I was quite familiar with your reputation before your recent dismissal. The emphasis on the last word was deliberate, meant to sting. Sarah kept her expression neutral. Former fleet, operating modified pirate vessels. Let me guess, you didn't leave voluntarily? Voss laughed. Perceptive. No, I was relieved of command after a disagreement with fleet policy regarding colonial protection. Apparently, my methods were considered too aggressive for peacekeeping operations. So you decided to become the threat you were supposed to protect against? I decided to take a more practical approach to ensuring colonial security. The defense fleet is too constrained by politics and bureaucracy to do what's necessary. But a private organization can be much more flexible. Sarah was beginning to understand. You're not pirates. You're recruiting. Very good, Captain. You see, there are quite a few former fleet officers who share my perspective. Officers who were passed over for promotion because they lacked political connections. Skilled personnel dismissed for budget reasons. People like yourself, who dedicated their lives to protecting human space only to be discarded when convenient. And, you think I'm interested in joining your mutiny? I think you're interested in actually making a difference instead of watching the colonies suffer under inadequate protection. The Terran Defense Fleet has 300 ships to patrol over 50 systems. We know the math doesn't work. Sarah had to admit he had a point. Even when she was still in the fleet, they'd been stretched thin. Response times to outer colony emergencies were measured in weeks, not hours. What exactly are you proposing? Join us, Captain. Bring your ship and crew into an organization that actually has the resources and freedom to protect human settlements. No bureaucratic interference, no political considerations, just professional military personnel doing what we were trained to do. Webb leaned close to Sarah's ear. Shuttles aboard. We can fight our way out if necessary. Sarah nodded slightly, then addressed Voss again. And if I refuse? Then, you'll continue working for a mining corporation, providing security for corporate profits while the real threats to human space go unchallenged. How long before the fleet dismisses more experienced officers? How long before there's no one left who remembers how to actually fight? The uncomfortable truth was that Voss wasn't entirely wrong. The fleet's personnel policies were creating serious capability gaps. But his solution involved attacking the very people and operations they were supposed to protect. I need time to consider your offer. Of course. We'll be in contact soon to hear your decision. Oh, and, Captain? Your former crew aboard the destroyer Vigilance sends their regards. Lieutenant Torres, Chief Rodriguez, Navigator Kim, they're all quite happy with their new positions. The communication channel closed, leaving Sarah staring at the tactical display. Her former crew was alive and, apparently, working for Voss. The people she'd trained and led were now part of whatever organization he was building. Orders, Captain? Webb asked quietly. Sarah looked at the enemy ships still surrounding them, then, at her own crew waiting for direction. Whatever decision she made in the next few minutes would determine not just their immediate survival, but the kind of person she was going to be in this new chapter of her life. Take us out of here, maximum burn. We've got planning to do. Sarah Chen sat in her quarters aboard the Defiance, staring at a secure communication terminal that showed an encrypted message from an unexpected source. 3 days had passed since the encounter with Admiral Voss and his fleet, and she'd spent every hour trying to understand the scope of what they were facing. The message was from Admiral Morrison himself, the same man who had dismissed her from the defense fleet just weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her. Chen, we need to talk. Secure channel. Priority Alpha protocols. She activated the quantum encryption system that TMC had installed for high-security communications with their corporate headquarters. Morrison's face appeared on the screen, looking haggard and considerably older than when she'd last seen him. Admiral. This is an unexpected honor. Morrison didn't seem to appreciate the sarcasm. Cut the attitude, Chin. We've got a situation that's bigger than your hurt feelings about being dismissed. My hurt feelings? Sarah leaned forward. Sir, with all due respect, you terminated me while pirates were attacking the shipping lanes, then refused to provide adequate security for the mining operations that supply your own fleet with critical materials. That decision wasn't mine alone. But, right now, we've got bigger problems. Morrison's expression grew grim. How much do you know about Admiral Voss? Former fleet officer, apparently bitter about his dismissal, now leading what appears to be a well-organized group of naval deserters. Why? Because in the past 6 months, we've lost contact with 14 ships and over 300 personnel. All experienced officers, all with clean service records, all dismissed or transferred under the recent restructuring. Sarah felt a chill. You think Voss is recruiting them? I think Voss is building a private navy using our own people. People who know our tactics, our weaknesses, our patrol routes. He's not just stealing ships, he's stealing institutional knowledge. The implications were staggering. If Voss had been systematically recruiting dismissed fleet personnel, he could have assembled a force with comprehensive knowledge of defense fleet operations. What do you want from me, Admiral? Morrison hesitated before answering. Your help. Officially, this conversation never happened. Unofficially, the fleet needs someone with your tactical expertise to assess the scope of this threat. You want me to spy on a potential enemy while working for a private corporation? I want you to do whatever it takes to protect human space. Whether that's in a fleet uniform or a civilian one doesn't matter to me anymore. Sarah studied Morrison's face, looking for deception or hidden agendas. The man looked genuinely concerned, which was more emotion than she'd seen from him in years. What changed your mind about me, Admiral? The Proxima Incident. Sarah's blood ran cold. Proxima Centauri was home to one of humanity's largest colonies, over 2 million people living on 3 different worlds. What happened at Proxima? 2 days ago, a fleet of unidentified ships attacked the orbital shipyards. Military precision, professional execution, no demands for surrender. They destroyed the defense platforms, disabled the communication relays, and made off with 6 partially completed destroyers. Casualties? Over 800 dead, mostly civilian shipyard workers. But, Chen, that's not the worst part. We analyzed the attack patterns, the tactical approach, the timing. It's your tactical doctrine from the Centauri conflict. Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned. The Centauri maneuver was something she developed during the war, a complex multi-vector assault designed to overwhelm orbital defenses while minimizing military casualties. It had become standard fleet doctrine, but few officers truly understood its subtleties. Someone who served under me? Had to be. The execution was too perfect for anything else. Chen, we think Voss isn't just recruiting random dismissed officers. He's specifically targeting people who worked with you, people who learned your tactical methods. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. Her own innovations, designed to protect human lives, had been turned against innocent civilians. You said Lieutenant Torres was with them, Webb said from the doorway. Sarah hadn't heard him enter, but she gestured for him to join the conversation. Morrison's expression grew more concerned when he saw Webb. Commander Webb. I heard you joined TMC as well. Admiral. Webb's tone was carefully neutral. We were just discussing the tactical implications of Voss's recruitment strategy. Then, you understand the urgency. Chen, we need intelligence on Voss's capabilities, his base of operations, his ultimate objectives. The fleet is stretched too thin to conduct a proper investigation. And, you think I can get that information how exactly? Morrison's expression grew uncomfortable. Voss made contact with you. He's clearly interested in recruiting you specifically. If you were to express interest in his offer. You want me to infiltrate his organization? Sarah shook her head. Admiral, that's a suicide mission. These people know me, they served under me. They'll spot deception immediately. Not if you're not deceiving them about your motivations. Webb stepped forward. What do you mean? Morrison addressed Sarah directly. What if you're genuinely considering his offer? What if you're honestly frustrated with fleet policies and interested in a more aggressive approach to colonial protection? Sarah stared at him. You want me to actually join them? I want you to be in a position to gather intelligence and, if possible, prevent attacks on civilian targets. Whether that requires you to officially defect or simply maintain deep cover is up to you. This is insane. This is necessary. Chen, we've run the numbers. If Voss continues recruiting at his current rate, he'll have a fleet larger than our own within 2 years. And, unlike us, he won't be constrained by political oversight or rules of engagement. Sarah thought about the attack on Proxima, about her former crew members serving under Voss, about the hundreds of civilian deaths that could have been prevented with better intelligence. What kind of support would I have? None officially. But, Webb here has maintained contact with several former fleet officers in the private sector. People who could provide logistics, intelligence, even military support if necessary. Webb nodded. There's a network of us out here, Captain. People who left the fleet for various reasons but still care about protecting human space. We call it the Grey Fleet, officers and crews serving in civilian capacities but coordinating informally on security matters. How extensive is this network? 43 ships so far, including some converted civilian vessels with impressive firepower. Not enough to fight a full-scale war, but enough to make a difference in specific situations. Sarah was beginning to understand the scope of what was happening. The fleet's budget cuts and personnel reductions had created not one but 2 parallel organizations, Voss's militaristic recruitment operation and Webb's informal defensive network. If I agree to this, what are your objectives? Morrison leaned forward. Primary objective is intelligence on Voss's capabilities and intentions. Secondary objective is prevention of attacks on civilian targets. Tertiary objective is recovery of stolen fleet assets and personnel. And if Voss's ultimate goals turn out to be legitimate? If he's genuinely trying to improve colonial security? Then, we find a way to work with him instead of against him. But, Chen, the attack on Proxima crossed a line. Whatever his motivations, he's killing innocent people. Sarah stood and paced to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, her former crew was serving under a man who might be either a visionary leader or a dangerous fanatic. The only way to know for sure was to get close enough to make that judgment. I'll need operational autonomy. No interference from Fleet Command, no second-guessing my decisions in the field. Agreed. And if this goes badly, if I'm discovered or compromised, the fleet disavows any knowledge of my activities. Morrison nodded grimly. Also agreed. Webb, what about TMC? They're paying for our services. Captain Martinez is former fleet intelligence. She's already aware of the broader situation and supports our objectives. TMC's mining operations provide excellent cover for intelligence gathering. Sarah made her decision. All right. But we do this my way. I make contact with Voss on my terms, when I'm ready, with my own agenda. What agenda? Morrison asked. Sarah turned from the viewport with a hard expression. I'm going to find out what happened to my people. And if Admiral Voss is responsible for turning them against everything they swore to protect, I'm going to stop him. After Morrison ended the communication, Webb remained in Sarah's quarters. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both contemplating the magnitude of what they'd just agreed to undertake. You know this could destroy your career, Webb said finally. What career? I was dismissed, remember? Right now, I'm a corporate security officer trying to protect mining operations. If this mission fails, I'll still be a corporate security officer trying to protect mining operations. And if it succeeds? Sarah smiled grimly. If it succeeds, maybe we'll have prevented a civil war. The fleet doesn't need to fight former fleet officers. We need to find a way to work together. You really think that's possible? After what happened at Proxima? I think we have to try. Because the alternative is watching human space tear itself apart while real threats gather strength in the dark. Webb stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Captain, I think you're making the right choice. Your crew would be proud. After he left, Sarah remained alone with her thoughts. Tomorrow she would begin the process of making contact with Voss, of walking into a situation that could easily result in her death or worse. But tonight, she allowed herself to hope that somewhere in the darkness between stars, there was still a path toward redemption for all of them. She activated her personal communication terminal and began composing a message to Admiral Voss. It was time to find out what had really happened to the people she'd trained, and whether there was still a way to bring them home. The meeting took place on a neutral merchant station in the Kepler system, 3 weeks after Sarah Chen had sent her message to Admiral Voss expressing interest in his organization. She arrived alone, as requested, carrying only a standard sidearm and a datapad containing her service record. The station was typical of independent trading posts, cramped corridors, mixed atmosphere that smelled of recycled air and industrial lubricants, and the kind of people who preferred to avoid official attention. Perfect for a clandestine meeting. Voss was waiting in a private dining room, dressed in civilian clothes but with the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. He stood when Sarah entered, offering a respectful nod rather than a salute. Captain Chen. Thank you for coming. Admiral Voss. I have to admit, your recruitment methods are unconventional. Voss smiled. Please, sit. Can I offer you something to drink? The real coffee here is surprisingly good for a frontier station. Sarah accepted the coffee and studied Voss carefully. He was older than she'd expected, probably mid-50s, with gray at his temples and the kind of calm confidence that came from decades of command responsibility. You wanted to discuss my joining your organization. I'm listening. First, let me address what I'm sure is your primary concern. Yes, I was responsible for the attack on Proxima Centauri. And, yes, civilians died in that operation. Sarah kept her expression neutral despite her anger. 800 people. 837, to be precise. I know each name, each face. Do you think that makes it easier or harder to sleep at night? I think it makes you a war criminal. Voss nodded slowly. Perhaps. But, let me tell you what those 837 deaths prevented. He activated a holographic projector that showed the Proxima system. 3 weeks after our attack, a Krillian raiding fleet hit the outer settlements. 60 ships, full military escort, targeting the mining colonies for slave labor. Sarah frowned. The Krillians were a known threat, but their raids were usually small-scale operations targeting isolated settlements. 60 ships is a full invasion force. Exactly. Our intelligence indicated they'd been planning this operation for months, waiting for the right moment. The shipyards at Proxima were building destroyers specifically designed for anti-Krillian operations. If those ships had been completed and deployed, the raiders would have faced serious opposition. So you attacked first to prevent the Krillians from capturing advanced warships. I attacked first to give the colonists a fighting chance. Without those ships, the Krillian raid was a conventional operation. Serious, but manageable with proper defensive tactics. Sarah studied the tactical display. What happened? The colonial militia, properly coordinated and supplied with intelligence we provided, repelled the attack. Total casualties, 43 military personnel, no civilian deaths. The Krillians lost 31 ships and retreated beyond the frontier. The moral mathematics were staggering. 800 civilians killed to prevent thousands of deaths and mass enslavement. Sarah understood the logic, but the price made her sick. You could have warned them. Evacuated the shipyards. Could I? The colonial government has 7 different political factions, all of them talking to different interest groups back on Earth. How long before news of the Krillian threat reached Krillian intelligence assets? How long before they changed their plans? Voss was right, and Sarah hated that he was right. Colonial security was compromised by political considerations and bureaucratic delays. The kind of rapid response necessary to prevent the Krillian attack would have been impossible through official channels. What about my former crew? Torres, Rodriguez, Kim? They're safe and well treated. They were rescued from a syndicate prison facility after their ship was captured during a patrol mission. The defense fleet listed them as missing in action and moved on. Sarah's blood ran cold. The fleet abandoned them? Budget constraints. The cost of a rescue operation was deemed excessive for 3 junior officers. I disagreed with that assessment. The betrayal was complete. Not only had the fleet dismissed her, they'd written off her people as acceptable losses. I want to see them. Of course. They're serving aboard the Liberation now, one of our converted cruisers. They've been promoted based on merit rather than political connections. Voss stood and walked to the viewport. Chen, I know what you're thinking. That I'm a terrorist, a rogue admiral who's lost touch with his principles. But, let me ask you something. In your 11 years of fleet service, how many times were you ordered to ignore a threat because helping would be politically inconvenient? Sarah didn't answer, but they both knew the truth. Colonial protection requests were routinely denied or delayed due to budget constraints, political considerations, or simple bureaucratic indifference. How many times did you watch settlements suffer because the fleet couldn't spare resources for minor emergencies? How many people died while you filled out requisition forms and waited for authorization that never came? What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we do what the Terran Defense Fleet should be doing but can't because of political constraints. Protect human settlements, regardless of their economic value or political connections. Fight the real threats while the fleet argues about jurisdiction and funding. By becoming pirates ourselves? Voss turned back to face her. By becoming what humanity needs us to be. The fleet has 300 ships to patrol 50 star systems. We have 43 ships with no political oversight and complete tactical freedom. Which force do you think is more effective at actually protecting people? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah knew the answer, but accepting it meant abandoning everything she'd believed about duty, honor, and legitimate authority. What would my role be? Tactical commander. Full authority over combat operations, strategic planning, personnel deployment. You'd have the resources to actually implement the tactics you developed, without interference from politicians or bureaucrats. And the moral implications of attacking civilians? Every military commander faces those choices, Chen. The only difference is that I'm honest about them. The fleet makes the same calculations, they just hide behind policy documents and plausible deniability. Sarah thought about Morrison's offer, about her mission to gather intelligence on Voss's organization. But, sitting across from the man himself, hearing his reasoning, she was beginning to question whether he was the real enemy. I need to see my people first. I need to know they joined willingly, that they weren't coerced. Absolutely. The liberation is 3 hours away. We can be there by this evening. As they prepared to leave the station, Voss asked one final question. Chen, what do you think will happen to the colonies if we don't act? If we leave their protection to a fleet that's systematically reducing its capability while threats increase? Sarah didn't answer, but she thought about the mining families in the Vega system, about the civilians on Proxima, about all the people living on the frontier who depended on others for protection they might never receive. 3 hours later, Sarah stood in the shuttle bay of the Liberation, waiting for the airlock to cycle. On the other side were people she'd trained, led, and cared about as family. People the fleet had abandoned, who Voss had rescued. The airlock opened, and Lieutenant Torres stepped through, wearing the uniform of Voss's organization. She looked older, more confident, but her smile was genuine when she saw Sarah. Captain! I can't believe you're here. Behind Torres came Rodriguez and Kim, both wearing the insignia of senior enlisted personnel. They looked healthy, well-equipped, and genuinely happy to see her. Torres, Rodriguez, Kim. Sarah struggled with her emotions. Are you all right? When the fleet said you were missing. We're fine, Captain, Torres said. Better than fine, actually. Admiral Voss got us out of a syndicate prison facility. We've been serving aboard this ship for 6 months now. And, you're here voluntarily? Rodriguez stepped forward. Captain, you trained us to protect people. That's what we're doing here. We've rescued 17 crews from pirate attacks, evacuated 4 colonies from natural disasters, and stopped 3 syndicate slave raids. The fleet couldn't or wouldn't do any of those operations, Kim added. Budget constraints, they said. Political complications. Sarah looked at her former crew, seeing the conviction in their eyes. These weren't brainwashed followers or coerced prisoners. They were military professionals who'd found an organization that actually allowed them to do their jobs. What about the attack on Proxima? The civilian casualties? Torres's expression grew somber. That was a hard decision, Captain. But, if we hadn't acted, the Krillians would have taken 50,000 colonists as slaves. Sometimes there aren't any good choices, only necessary ones. Sarah spent the next 6 hours aboard the Liberation, touring the ship, meeting the crew, reviewing their operational records. Every person she spoke with was a former fleet officer with a similar story, dismissed for budget reasons, passed over for political considerations, or simply frustrated with bureaucratic interference in military operations. The ship itself was impressive. Better equipped than most fleet vessels, with upgraded weapons systems, improved life support, and the kind of morale she hadn't seen in years. These people believed in what they were doing. As evening approached, Sarah stood alone in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars and wrestling with the most important decision of her career. Webb's voice came from behind her. Captain? I thought I might find you here. She turned to see her first officer from the Defiance, but he was wearing the uniform of Voss's organization. Webb. You're with them too. I've been coordinating between Admiral Voss and the Grey Fleet for months. This isn't about choosing sides, Captain. It's about choosing effectiveness over bureaucracy. Morrison said you were building a network of former fleet officers in civilian positions. I was. But it became clear that loose coordination wasn't enough. We needed unified command, shared resources, and the freedom to act without political oversight. Admiral Voss offered all of that. Sarah looked back out at the stars. What about our mission? The intelligence gathering for Morrison? Morrison is a good man, but he's trapped in a system that can't adapt fast enough to meet current threats. The fleet will always be constrained by politics and budget considerations. Out here, we can actually protect people. By attacking civilians when necessary? By making the hard choices that fleet commanders make every day, but taking responsibility for them instead of hiding behind policy documents. Sarah made her decision. Set course for TMC headquarters. I need to submit my resignation. Webb smiled. Welcome to the real war, Captain. 2 weeks later, Admiral Morrison sat in his office reading Sarah Chen's final report. She'd submitted it through encrypted channels, along with her formal resignation from TMC security and her request to be listed as missing in action rather than absent without leave. The report contained detailed intelligence on Voss's organization, ship specifications, personnel rosters, base locations, operational capabilities. Everything the fleet needed to either negotiate with them or fight them. But the final paragraph made Morrison reconsider everything he thought he knew about the situation. Admiral, after extensive investigation, I believe Admiral Voss and his organization represent humanity's best hope for effective colonial protection. His methods are questionable, but his results speak for themselves. The fleet is failing in its primary mission due to political constraints and resource limitations. Perhaps it's time to consider whether the real enemy is the system itself, not the people trying to work around it. Morrison closed the file and stared out his office window at the fleet shipyards, where half the berths sat empty due to budget cuts. In the past month, 3 more colonies had requested emergency assistance that he couldn't provide. Meanwhile, reports indicated that Voss's ships were successfully protecting settlements throughout the outer systems. Maybe Chen was right. Maybe the real enemy wasn't rogue admirals or budget constraints or political interference. Maybe the real enemy was humanity's inability to adapt its institutions to meet evolving threats. Morrison opened a new communication channel and began drafting a message to Admiral Voss. It was time for an official conversation between the fleet and the people who were actually doing the fleet's job. The civil war everyone feared might still be avoidable, but only if both sides were willing to admit that the current system wasn't working for anyone except the bureaucrats and politicians who benefited from the status quo. 6 months later, the Terran Defense Fleet and the Colonial Protection Force signed a formal cooperation agreement. Admiral Voss retained operational command of outer system security, while the fleet focused on core world defense and supply line protection. Sarah Chen served as the primary liaison between the two organizations, finally, able to use her skills to protect people rather than serve political interests. Her dismissal from the fleet had led to something no one expected, a more effective approach to defending human space. Sometimes being rejected by the system was the first step toward fixing it.